Hey guys, a quick update for those who didn't watch the live stream the other day. Live streams going forward after this week will be on Twitch only, so if you want to continue to watch live streams, please go over to Twitch. This whole YouTube thing is my full-time job, but I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket because YouTube is a volatile platform. So please follow me over on Twitch, and I will see you over there. I'll be doing video game live streams, as well as Hammered Out and other usual live streams that normally appear on this channel over there. If you don't like the video game live streams, that's fine. There will be a clear title and format indication before every single live stream, so you'll be able to tune into what you like. The only thing that sucks about live streams is I can't do this. Well, now that I've miraculously recovered from my intro trying to do horrible things to me, let's get right into the fan art. First of all, we have a Suris from Boomer, a Suris About to Strike from Burning Alcohol, and then finally a Gem Suris from Jack and Quill. As always, thank you all for your submissions, and... well, PragerU is bound to be a headache and a half, and I really don't have any headache meds available. So instead, I guess I'll just go ahead and call for help. Is anybody around that can actually help me with this thing? It's PragerU. I really don't want to suffer alone.
Ah, not fucking PragerU again. Oh, Suris, it's Atheist Huska, and I got some emphysemas. They can tell it's got emphasis on the zemas I drink.
I know that's not your voice.
Nope, it's not.
No, it's definitely not. Okay, so everybody who does not know, this is my friend Nathanial Walters. He has been on my show before when tackling other issues like abortion, and also when tackling Matt Powell's Science Falsely So-Called video.
I do remember it. Yes, we did do that. I had forgotten. I want to continue to forget about Matt Powell, and now I can't. Thank you, Suris.
I'm sorry that I've made you suffer, but speaking of suffering, would you like to suffer along with me with this PragerU video?
You know, I have Mountain Dew and coffee. Let's do it.
I don't think either of those are strong enough, but let's go on.
Evolution. You learned about it in high school. It goes like this. Life started out with very simple forms, and then gradually, over hundreds of millions of years, morphed into all the forms we see today. Bacteria to Beethoven.
So bacteria to Beethoven, that's like their new molecules to man. If they keep doing this, are they going to do like angiosperm to Adam, primordial to Pam, onsolite to Obama? I don't think they'd like Obama very much. So.
You said the O word. It's PragerU. They don't like that here.
No. Socialism 101.
Not a straight line, of course, but that's roughly how it went. This was the theory proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859, and with some modification, it's been embraced as unassailable by the scientific community over the last century.
It's fucking Stephen Meyer. I know Stephen Meyer, by the way. I met him back in January, and he didn't answer my question because he said, I don't think this is a religious thing, this intelligent design movement we have. And I asked him the question in front of a church, and I said, if it's not a religious thing, I noticed that you do all of your stuff inside of a church. And he did not answer my question. So I'm not a big fan of his.
Well, that's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, well, for this video, it's great. Hello, audience.
As evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins says, if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is either ignorant, stupid, or insane.
I think that Dawkins might be a bit crass in his wording, but I don't think he's altogether wrong. I would say at this point, anybody that has a functional understanding and still denies evolutionary theory certainly fits into, with maybe the exception of insane, one of those categories. I might personally replace insane with indoctrinated, but I don't think he's wrong.
But is that right? Are there no scientific reasons to doubt the evolutionary account of life's origins?
Oh, there's certainly plenty of scientific reasons to doubt. Quite literally everything. It's almost like that's actually science's job. This is actually the reason why we have peer review. We don't take anything on face value. We doubt it constantly, and then it verifies itself in spite of that doubt. What a weird thing.
But also important to note here as well is that what Dawkins is speaking about is the evolutionary theory, and what I'm certain Stephen Meyer is speaking about is the origin of life, which we have to continuously, for some reason, remind these people is not the same thing.
In November 2016, I attended a conference in London convened by some of the world's leading evolutionary biologists.
Oh, so you attended a thing in London with some of the world's most leading evolutionary biologists. I'm assuming you got a chance to ask them questions, and I'm assuming that they answered, which is something that you didn't really do for Nathaniel.
Ha!
The purpose? To address growing doubts about the modern version of Darwin's theory.
Okay, so I know what he's talking about when he mentions that convention he went to is the Royal Society's November 2016, and I have to look down at my note to make sure I got this right. New Trends in Evolutionary Biology, Biological, Philosophical, and Social Science Perspectives. It's a seminar that happened in the UK back in 2016, and what he's doing is being dishonest when he says they was there to address growing doubts about the modern version of Darwin's theory. The goal was to explore what proponents are calling the extended evolutionary synthesis, or EES, which seeks to replace modern synthesis, sometimes called neo-Darwinism. I just fucked up saying neo-Darwinism. They were not looking at whether evolutionary theory, which we remind people all the time is the foundation of modern biology and medicine, is in some kind of crisis or has a debate at its core. It does not. The EES proponents simply feel as though the modern synthesis doesn't capture the, quote, full richness of evolution. If you want to know more about the conference in detail, Carl Zimmer from the New York Times wrote a great piece on it.
Let's look at just 2 scientific reasons to doubt this theory.
Oh, so you're just going to bring up the conference as a footnote, but then not actually talk about the conference? Why did you bring it up? Oh, wait, no, I know exactly why you brought it up. You brought it up with the specific wording because it makes it sound like church. Almost as if you understand that when you make something sound like church, it's negative. This is some of the most introspective you've ever been, Stephen.
First, the Cambrian explosion. A weird and wonderful thing happened 530 million years ago. A whole bunch of major groups of animals, what scientists call the phyla, appeared abruptly within a geologically short window of time.
I wonder if he's going to actually define geologically short window of time.
Well, he's being obviously vague with the word phyla, but that's not actually the real issue I take with what he said. 10 million years is a very long time, but of course the Cambrian explosion was somewhere around 40 million years. So 10 million years, even being a long time, is even really short. It's about 30 million years short, and that's probably on purpose when they say 10 million years and they make it look like it's a very small amount of time. Now, geologically speaking, it is, but it's a very long time. But I'm not going to quibble too much about that, because when you say 10 million years, at least he's not saying the Ken Ham or the other folks that are going to say it's 6,000 years. So you know what? 10 million years is a lot closer.
About 10 million years. These novel animal forms, exhibiting prototypes of most animal body designs we see today, emerged in the fossil record without evidence of earlier ancestors.
So there's already one issue I have here. When you say that there were prototypes of current-day animals in your earlier phyla, that makes it sound as if there was some intent to get to the later stages, when evolution doesn't exactly have intent. 10 million years from now, every animal we see on Earth is going to look like our current animals that we have now were prototypes for them, because that's just simply how evolutionary branching works. But that language implies some sort of intent.
But he also says, and what's even up on the screen there, that they appear in the fossil record without any evidence of ancestors. Now, that's not exactly true, because we have many trace fossils that are about billions of years old and far before the Cambrian explosion. And it's really more specific even than that. We see an explosion of species with hard exoskeletons, and it makes sense because softer bodied species would not fossilize as easily or as often. Now, that just kind of makes sense from what you and I would say that would happen in any kind of record, especially something where it's all underwater. But even then, we don't just find those. More than a few scientists agree with the theory that Nereoids, whose exoskeleton was not hardened by the calcium carbonate that we see in trilobites, are their direct ancestors. Trilobites are arthropods, but finding other Precambrian Metazoan fossils is incredibly difficult because there are only 2 places on Earth that have the type of diversity that scientists are looking for when we look at like things where we find the Burgess Shale, where we find as many trilobites as we do. And it's difficult to get to some of those places, especially when they're like in Russia. So we don't have a lot of fossils from Precambrian or Cambrian times, but what we do find is that there is an incredibly diverse amount of species there, and yeah, they're all very distinct. They're just what we'd expect to find is what we continue to find.
Did you catch that? a huge number of diverse animals appeared with no discernible antecedents.
Except you're lying. Like you're literally lying through your teeth. As Nathaniel just explained, we actually do have those trace fossils.
We do. We have cyanobacteria and other types of archaea that exist from around 3.75 billion years ago. And again, while it's difficult to get to things in places like Russia, it's really easy to see these types of cyanobacteria and stuff in places like Australia, where we have the oldest, possibly we have rocks that are as old as Earth there. Even so, even though they are trace fossils, they're still there, and it's actually not a unique find because we're finding more and more of them. I was reading a book from Bruchette, which is called The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs. And you may not know this, Suris, but this goes beyond the Cambrian explosion. But we are finding and naming a new species of dinosaur almost every single week.
Almost as if science is marching forward, while places like the Discovery Institute are desperate to march backwards.
Which kind of belies their name when they say they are the Discovery Institute.
So where did they come from? This question really bothered Darwin, and he acknowledged that he could give it no satisfactory answer. Nor can scientists today.
Darwin's dilemma, man. Of course Darwin couldn't provide a satisfactory answer. He didn't have access to a microscope that could view things at a cellular level. But also, guess who really doesn't matter in modern research? Darwin. The fact that he could even consider the hypothesis is a phenomenal thing. But given his time and lack of like scientific technology and things that we can predict moving forward, we wouldn't expect him to be able to overcome his own biases of his time. But as I mentioned before, we have trace fossils dating back to 3.5 billion years, far before the Cambrian or Ediacaran. This is really a non-argument, but people like Stephen Meyer can't help but bring up Darwin because they feel if they can somehow discredit Darwin, they overturn evolutionary theory. How come they never bring up how bad Darwin was with genetics?
You know, it's really weird that they think that Darwin is the linchpin for all of evolution, which, again, I'd like to bring up a counterexample. If we were to say discredit, 5 of the letters from Paul, don't you think that would maybe do something against Christian theology? Maybe show that the canon is at least somewhat unreliable? Oh wait, we've already done that. We actually only have a handful of letters from Paul that we can definitely discern are written by him. That's already been done. This is awkward.
And they seem to not care about that either.
The renowned biologist Eugene Koonin of the National Center for Biotechnology Information describes the abrupt appearance of the Cambrian animals and other organisms such as dinosaurs, birds, flowering plants, and mammals as a pattern of biological big bangs.
Even if he were to do so, though, you can look at that. We look at plants, we look at animals. Well, not just animals, but mammals. We look at dinosaurs and any kind of archosaur that came before the dinosaurs around the Triassic time. And you know what we see there? We see a bunch of ecological niches that are available for things like the Cambrian explosion, for things like at the end of the Cretaceous with the KPG, whenever the non-avian dinosaurs are all extinct, we now have an incredible amount of ecological niches that are available for, guess what? The mammals. Why do you think mammals grew so large at a certain time? These are things that actually are predicted to happen after we cause the next mass extinction.
So what caused all these new forms of life to arise? That question leads to a second big doubt, the DNA enigma.
Oh God, I'm already going to predict, as somebody who has not actually watched this episode all the way through until this recording, I'm going to go ahead and predict that they're going to say DNA cannot produce new information.
You know, I as I was mentioning to you earlier, all I have done is read his script on this, so I've never actually heard him say this. My prediction was very close to yours, and I thought they would bring up Ray Comfort's book. And as it turns out, well, you just play on and you'll see how funny that is.
In the 1950s, James Watson and Francis Crick made a startling discovery. The DNA molecule stores information as a 4-character digital code.
Okay, it's actually not that the DNA stores information as a code. It's that we look at the DNA, and the only way we've been able to interpret it is by writing everything we see down as a code. When you try to make the language that DNA has a code baked in, that, again, like a previous example that was brought up, implies some sort of intentionality because you have to have a coder to make a code, which means that this is very, very subversive language. In truth, we view DNA as a code because that's the only way we can interpret something that complex. It's also the only way that we can conceptualize something like that as a colloquialism after that point. But that does not imply that DNA itself has little letters written in as if, what's the way he's probably going to try to word this at some point? God was scribbling in the blanks?
He actually never mentions God. Which they don't on purpose.
Well, I know they have to on purpose. It's PragerU. PragerU doesn't try to argue that Christianity is true because they think that the theology is right. They argue that it's true because they think that it's the thing needed to keep Western values and civilization held together. Judeo-Christian values, as they call them. So it's very deliberate that they will not mention God specifically, but having dealt with places like the Discovery Institute, Creation Ministries, and elsewise, I'm already used to this kind of rhetoric, and I know what the underlying reason is.
Oh yes, I think that at this point we know exactly what they're. This is the same organization that forgot how to copy paste find and replace creationism and intelligent design in their book, and that's one of the big reasons they lost their court battle back in 2005. So
strings of precisely sequenced chemicals inside the DNA helix store the instructions, the information for building the crucial proteins that cells need to survive. Unless the chemical letters in the DNA text are sequenced properly, a protein molecule will not form. No proteins, no cells. No cells, no living organisms. Bill Gates has said DNA is like a software program. Let's think about that for a second.
Oh, so you are going to go into the intentionality argument without directly referencing God, according to Nathaniel.
Well, I'm going to say before he even does this, because I wrote my note on this while I was again reading just the script of this. Which, if you'd like, you can find the script of the original video. I was just reading it, and I was writing it before he said anything, and I said, "Not Bill Gates and computer software." Computer programs don't reproduce naturally, so that doesn't matter at all. It's another one of those false analogies they try and put in place. And we also know that DNA recombination and or coding errors specifically lead to mutations. These mutations add up over time, not overnight, but regardless, it's what we call evolution.
For computers to run faster and perform more functions, they require new code. Well, the same is true for life.
Okay, so as somebody who has a computer that is built for video recording and editing, for computers to run faster, new code is not usually the thing that you need. It's usually new hardware. Like 9 times out of 10, it's new hardware, not new code. If I could just write a program right now that will suddenly triple my RAM, all the way to 48 gigabytes of RAM, that would be excellent. I would love that, but that's not the reality we live in. I know that there are things you can do within code that can optimize the hardware that you're using so that your computer runs faster, but that's not the same thing as just adding speed to your PC. For that, you will need hardware.
To build new forms of life, the evolutionary process would need to produce new genetic information, new code. But this raises questions about the creative power of natural selection and mutation.
And I know who you're implying has that creative power here. You're just not going to say it because it's a PragerU video. But that's okay. We know what you mean, Stephen Myers. We know.
Natural selection is a simple sorting process. Species keep favorable mutations that allow them to survive.
Favorable mutations? Hold on a second. Hold on 1 second. You said that new code is needed. Would you like to know how that new code is made, Stephen Myers of the Discovery Institute, filtered through the PragerU enlightened right-wing centristy lens? Would you like to know how that new code is made? It's called mutations, you dingus!
But eliminate bad mutations that cause their members to die out. No one doubts that natural selection is a real process, and that it produces minor variations. But many biologists now doubt that it produces major innovations in biological form.
Who?
Name 5.
Name some prominent ones, please. Who?
I must have missed that because I didn't see that was in the script anywhere. Because you and I had the same reaction to that. Like, wait a second, who? Again, going back to the thing he went to, I am aware of that the conference he went to back in 2016 because there were a lot of really well-known scientists there, not just molecular biologists. Geneticists were there. People speaking about the reason that we need to change the way that we look at evolutionary processes, that it's not just like they're even considering adding things like epigenetics and stuff into evolutionary theory. And that's what they're talking about. And I want, if 5 of the scientists that were there would say that what he just said is true, I want to know who they are.
To see why, think again about software. What happens if you introduce a few random changes into computer code? You'll likely mess it up, right?
Yes, that's because computer code works differently from DNA. Trust me, I learned how to code in Java and C++ and in SQL. In all of those, I would get errors all the time. This is why I am not actually a programmer now. I hated every minute of it. But your analogy is about software, and the difference between software and human genetics is that DNA directly influences and can change hardware for human beings, or literally any living being at all. I cannot code 48 gigabytes of RAM into my computer. These analogies don't work because software interfaces with pre-existing hardware, whereas DNA actively shapes and creates hardware. These are two very different things. They are not analogous. Stop doing this. You're making the computer enthusiast in me hurt. Very hurts.
Though it might still work if you don't make too many changes. But if you make enough random changes, your program will stop functioning altogether. You certainly can't keep doing this and expect some cool new program to pop out.
Have you ever heard of a Bethesda game? Just, please tell me you've. I have to assume you're arguing in good faith. I have to. And in assuming that, I would have to assume that you've never heard of Bethesda. Because if you had, you would know the old adage, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
There's a mathematical reason for this. In all codes and languages, there are vastly more ways of arranging characters that will generate gibberish than there are arrangements that will generate meaningful sequences. And this applies to DNA. Remember, natural selection only selects sequences that random mutations generate. Yet experiments have established that DNA sequences capable of making stable proteins are extremely rare, and thus really hard to stumble on randomly.
Okay, so this is a logical fallacy then. Just because they're rare doesn't mean it doesn't happen. In fact, how many different DNA sequences are possible inside of the human genome? There are millions upon millions. And so what you're talking about then is something that is incredibly rare, but you have to quantify how rare that is mathematically. And then you have to stick it inside of an actual linear equation to say, now it has some sort of like predictive power for how it's going to be positively or negatively affected based on the nature around it. At that point, then maybe you have something you can speak about, but something being rare doesn't have anything to do with whether or not it's naturally possible or naturally impossible. What we know is that rare things happen all the time. To steal from Vice Rhino, something rare happened to me the other day. All the lights were green on the way home. What does that mean? Does that mean it can only happen every once in a while, that you're not going to believe me, or that it's impossible for it to happen? No, rare just means it doesn't happen very often. But again, we have to mathematically quantify what that means based on how many lines of code we're talking about And then at that point, how many different combinations we're talking about. And then at that point, we're talking about how many of them are positive, negative, or benign. Rare means nothing.
If this person really wants to understand why rare means nothing, then he should go to a card shop, sit down, and ask any random person what their last D&D session was like. I guarantee you at least 15 incredibly rare occurrences, dictated by nothing more than a lucky dice roll, happened to every one of them.
And guess what? Every single time, and I'm stealing this again from, I'm pretty certain, Vice Rhino again, but every single roll of the dice is rare. All of them. And guess what? It happens every single time.
This is also an argument against the fine-tuning argument.
How rare? While working at Cambridge University, molecular biologist Douglas Axe showed that for every DNA sequence that generates a relatively short functional protein, there are 10 to the 77th power non-functional sequences.
Oh, fucking Douglas Axe. You mean Douglas Axe at the Discovery Institute? That guy? Douglas Axe? Why don't you use somebody that doesn't work at the same organization as you? Also, what Douglas Axe wrote, the things he was talking about were proteins, and by the way, again, I know the paper he's talking about because he's unable to quantify this mathematically, and it was shown to be the case. I believe that the paper is called Co-option and Irreducible Complexity or something of that nature, and it's shown that he chose fringe molecules that were most likely going to break down anyway. And so he selected, he himself selected these molecules that were likely to not survive anyway, and to show that this is how rare this is and how negative the appearance is. And again, this is something else that I'm providing to Suris because I've read this before. I've read his papers. We all know who Douglas Axe is, and it's unfortunate these people. Well, it is unfortunate because we actually want to see discovery and progress. That's the thing that we want to see in science more than anything else. And it's unfortunate that for something to be named the Discovery Institute, you have to push things back to where we have to rehash things instead of going out and discovering new things like new cures for different kinds of cancer, or ways that we can recycle things better, or ways that we can continue to save actual animals on our planet, which would include ourselves, by the way.
Now consider that there are only 10 to the 65th power atoms in our galaxy. So finding a new DNA sequence capable of building a functional protein is like searching blindfolded for a single marked atom among a trillion Milky Way galaxies.
And yet you're here, which means that regardless of however the math works out, you still got here. If you map every single event that has happened in your life in sequence up to this point, the likelihood that you would be where you're standing right now is roughly the same as what you just mapped out. Because you've made millions of decisions in your life, many of them probably binary decisions. And through those decisions, we can mathematically point out exactly how rare or how likely it is that you would be in the position you're in right now. And we would get a really big number that would show that you likely wouldn't be here in any other possible world. But none of that matters, because we don't live in any of those possible worlds. We live in this one.
Talk about a needle in a haystack. As I show in my book Darwin's Doubt, even 4 billion years of life's history is not enough time to overcome a search problem this big.
That, again, implies intentionality. That search problem is only a problem if the intent is to find the needle in the haystack. But as anybody who's ever won the lottery can tell you, incredibly bad odds can still lead you to discovery.
Oh, and Suris, did you catch what he did there?
Oh, what did he do?
That was a shill for a book right there. It was really quick. It wasn't like what you get on like AIG on Answers News and stuff like that, but it was real quick shill for his book. He said, and as I show in my book, Darwin's Doubt, and he put up a nice little picture of it on the screen. I noticed that.
Fair enough. I didn't even... The first thing that came to my mind was that, oh, you're referencing yourself. That's stupid. It didn't even matter to me for half a second that, oh, wait a minute, this was actually shilling. You know what? Shilling is an interesting thing, because now that you've done it, I feel like I am obligated to do it. Because as it turns out, I'm affiliated with a website called DDLG Playground. So why don't you go ahead, Stephen Myers, and use my coupon code Suris, get 10% off of a dildo there, and promptly use it to go screw yourself.
So 2 serious doubts about modern Darwinian theory. The Cambrian explosion, the sudden appearance of new animals, which evolutionary theory has failed to explain.
But it hasn't.
Yeah.
It literally hasn't failed to explain that. In fact, evolutionary theory shows everything going back in nested hierarchies, leading to where we are now. Yes, there are some gaps there, and those gaps are largely things we would expect, because not everything in the world can become fossilized, because fossilization is a rare process. But there's that thing again. It's rare, but it still happened. Weird.
It's actually almost kind of funny, because evolutionary theory and the way that he's speaking about it with the Cambrian explosion fits into the principles of uniformitarianism, specifically the principles of superposition, which were around far before Darwin wrote his book and far before evolutionary theory was an accepted science. And so this just happens to lend more weight to the efficacy of geological columns, and at this point, absolute dating. So if anything, he's actually making the case for us.
And the DNA enigma, the implausibility of random mutations producing the information needed to build new forms of animal life.
You're going to talk to somebody who used to play competitive card games for money about implausibility being a problem. You are aware that most theory crafters in card games literally construct decks to fight against improbability and implausibility. We literally engineer for hundreds of hours theory crafting specifically to make it to where it is more likely in an improbable scenario that you will draw a certain hand of cards because that is the winning hand. There are literally hobbies based solely around the fact that implausibility is a problem, and there are ways to circumvent it.
Scientists who know about these problems are not ignorant, stupid, or insane.
But you might be one of those. Or a shill. I'm just gonna go with the shill.
He's a shill, yeah, for sure.
They are just appropriately skeptical. I'm Stephen Meyer, Senior Fellow at the Discovery Institute for Prager University.
And I am Suris, for nobody, except myself, which makes me largely more individualistic than you, which is weird.
I'm Nathaniel. I'm here for Susan, maybe? I mean, that's who I do everything for, so I guess that works out.
What did you think about that video? It was PragerU, which means that I think I need some acetaminophen.
It was a lot of nonsense in just over 5 minutes. I can actually appreciate the way that they're able to do that now, because I've been to and will continue to go to many of their little events they have and sit down and listen to them and take notes, which I have plenty of them, and listen to like somebody like Metaxas from the Discovery Institute say that the piece he wrote in the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal or something like that was the most viewed on their website in like the history of time, to which I said 9/11 called, they want your lie back. And this is far more succinct. It's not different from their regular talking points because it's what they've always said. And they tried to notice that there is no actual science being done here. It was Stephen Myers saying that there are certain scientists who will be left unnamed for some reason, even though this would overturn all of science and lead to the Nobeliest of Nobels, and saying that certain scientists doubt the efficacy and the foundation of modern biology, modern medicine, really all of modern biological science, fail to provide any actual testable, repeatable, falsifiable science of their own, which is a foundational piece. As Aaron Ross, what does he say? One of the main foundational falsehoods of creationism, right, is that they aren't science because they can't make predictable theories, falsifiable at all theories. And so this is another example of that, but it's 5 minutes of more wordplay and taking things out of context and throwing shade and shilling their own stuff. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's really strange that there are people that he was willing to list, people who agreed with him and wrote pieces for the Discovery Institute specifically, but when it came to actually naming scientists, he didn't name any. This is one step below what I've seen many other times, where scientists that are named that have some issues with the theory of evolution are scientists in largely unrelated fields, which means that they are functionally laymen when it comes to areas outside of their field.
And that's part of it's actually something I'm working on, and I look forward to actually showing you some of the research I found with that, because I've certainly written some of those folks and asked them questions about it. To say that there are now apparently over 1,000 scientists, not many, but more than a few of whom are deceased, who would say that this is the list of people who question Darwin's theory or whichever. As I go through them, it's less than 10% are involved in any way in any kind of biological evolutionary field. And I think that says a lot about the type of real intellectual honesty that this Discovery Institute and AIG and others like them, ICR here in DFW, really like to say that they're a part of wanting to try and find truth and wanting to really represent things honestly. They are incredibly dishonest with how they go about doing things. And in fact, they at times outright lie. And then they go and set up churches and tell people that they're correct. And I find that to be maybe a little bit not like Jesus.
Well, remember, Jesus was all about presenting the Pharisees with radical new theories on theology, and the Discovery Institute, in following in his footsteps, are largely trying to make us take several steps backwards Jesus wouldn't like this. Never mind.
Suris, I appreciate you letting me come on here with you. It's been a while since we've been able to collab, and I always enjoy all of our conversations, whether it be on Twitter or in DMs or on the phone. And so I really appreciate you and you actually coming on and having me on. And my final thought, obviously, because the first time you and I spoke about this was last week. We were on Godless Engineer's channel, and for me, this one and the research that went into this for me goes to my dear friend and our dear friend who passed on last Sunday, Bill Ludlow. And so Bill, from me, this one was for you.
I'd like to personally thank Nathaniel for helping out with this video, and this is one of a couple videos that are being made in memory of Bill Ludlow. For those who don't know, he did pass recently, and all of us are mourning his loss. I was nowhere near as close to him as I would have liked to be, but I am going to have some people on my channel who were. But I'll go ahead and leave it at that. As always, everyone, insert the video tagline here.